Today's class is Introduction to Measuring Your Impact, Shifting Focus from Activities to Impact. My name is Yvonne Adao-Sims, and I'm the Educational Program Manager for Candid based in Atlanta. And today we also have Lori on the line, who is the same title.
Good morning. I'm the Yvonne of the West. I am also Educational Programming Manager. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yep. And then we have Ebony kind of back there, I'm sure, chatting and talking to you via the Q&A and chat. And Ebony is also based in the Atlanta area. And we have a special guest back there you'll see as well, Stephen, who will probably be answering questions as well. If you don't know Candid, we always like to start by introducing that in 2019, Foundation Center and GuideStar joined forces to become one single nonprofit called Candid. It's a 501c3 that believes in solving the social sector problems through data, through research, and through collaboration and training. And this is one of the trainings that we have. So welcome, and we're glad to have you here. So again, we're here to talk about measuring impact, and what's particularly exciting for us is this is newer for us, and we wanted to make sure that we had a class like this because we knew that a lot of times we know that what we want to show people when it comes to our nonprofits is how we're doing. So when people talk about a nonprofit, what they're looking for really is what is your impact and what exactly are you getting done? And we want to make sure all of our nonprofits know how to express that. So after this training, you should be able to draft measurable outcomes for a program. You should be able to identify the parts of a logic model. We know how exciting that part is. And then report impact on your Candid profile. So we'll cover that as well. So what are outcomes? We want to make sure we're starting to talk about the language of outcomes because we know what they are to some degree, but sometimes we don't speak in the way that it's kind of obvious and people can understand. So outcomes are a change. They're a change in attitude and beliefs, knowledge and skills, behavior, and or condition that results from the services you provide. Outcomes are essentially when you're thinking about why you decided to have a particular program and why you decided to start a nonprofit, they're kind of that North Star. We want this to happen eventually, either that the attitude of these constituencies are going to change, or that we're going to teach something and they'll have this knowledge and skill now when we're done, or behavior. They're going to have much more, confidence, and they're going to be able to do these things based upon what we show them or what we expose them to. And then condition. A lot of times when you think about nonprofits, you're thinking about like way down the line, because we had this nonprofit, then the condition of this community or this school or this particular sect of the population is going to change, like long term. So those are the kinds of things that we want to talk about in this class, that language of outcomes. So the language that I was just talking about. We usually, when we would have a lot of students in person or in a different kind of setting, we talk about these different words that when you're trying to explain what you're doing and you're trying to show exactly what your organization exists for, these kinds of words. So you have result, milestone, targets, goal, output. These are the words that when you're writing proposals, or when you're reporting out what you're going to do and what you've done throughout the time with your nonprofit, these are the kinds of words that you use. And I'm glad somebody's happy about those. But these are the words that you want to make sure that you're using and that you're not kind of skipping over, because what happens is a lot of times when we talk about our accomplishments and achievements, we're actually just talking about what the program did. right? So we had, 100 people came to the walk. So that was really great. But what did you actually achieve through that? And that's what we want to make sure you understand, that you're communicating when you talk about outcomes, rather than what Lori will get into a little bit more, rather than outputs. So we're not always counting, but we're actually figuring out what changed. Outcome measurement answers the following questions. To what extent are your programs effective? Are you achieving the change that you set out to create? So that's what we really want to make sure that you understand. And there's little tweaks that when you think about what you might report out to someone, whether it's a grant, a foundation, or just on your website or on your Candid profile, what you want people to understand is, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Are we actually being effective? And when you measure, you also want to be able to express that out. So all of these different tools that you use to measure, whether it's surveys, whether it's tests, whether it's you actually have a curriculum and then you can show the differences, whether it's asking teachers, whatever it is that you do, once you do those measurements and you feel good about what you're doing, or you want to express what it is that you have accomplished, that's showing your effectiveness. And I think beyond understanding how nonprofits kind of run, and are they doing an effective job, and when we donate our money, are they doing what they're supposed to do? Beyond that, that's pretty much what nonprofits are, when you trust the nonprofit, when you're saying, you know what, they actually get things done. So you really want to show that in everything that you do. Are you achieving the change that you set out to create? This is important for the nonprofit itself, right? You're not only doing this to show others, but you want to make sure when you decide, hey, these are the programs that we're having, these are the different things that we decided are the best to do. This is your opportunity to decide and to pivot. So you create measures so that you can improve your programming and make sure that it's something that's doing exactly what you thought it would do in the end. We've done a couple of logic models for programs that we have here, and it really does, here's the benefits, it really does increase clarity. Like, we decided, okay, we want to start up this program again. We want to make sure that it's successful. So let's create a logic model and let's figure out, if we want to accomplish, XYZ at the end, how we get there. So what exactly are we doing, why, and how? So that's one of the things that you get. What success looks like, that's really important. You should never start a program, and it kind of happens sometimes where you're doing good work and you figured out something that's kind of, people are coming and everyone's happy, but you haven't necessarily decided what success looks like. So you want to have that. You want to have that kind of North Star and that goal of knowing what success looks like. And that's why it's good to have this language and logic models, because you'll actually write it down. If this happens, then we're successful. And you'll know what you've accomplished, because if you know where you're going, if you said, okay, this is, if 9 out of 10, or if this happens with the surveys or whatever it is, you can actually see if you're accomplishing that, if you have it written down. It also, what I was mentioning before, is if you want to fix something, right? So it enables learning and innovation. So you can decide if this isn't exactly happening, or it's not happening like we thought it would, or it turns out when we did something, something kind of went wrong and it actually went better. So when you have all of that written, you can actually go back and say, hey, why don't we change this? Or, you know what, this worked really well. Let's keep this part. So you're really creating this as a tool, not only to show others, but to learn and innovate within your organization. And it puts meaning to mission. So again, sometimes you hear logic model and you're thinking like, oh God, another thing that I have to create to make for others. But a lot of times it just helps a lot with understanding this is what we're trying to accomplish, and this is how we're going to do it. And so that mission that we talk about all the time, you get to actually see this written out, and you get to see how it'll work to get your meaning to your mission. And it assures staff alignment. We had one of our cohorts, we had leaders that are serving boys and men of color with their organizations. And we had someone say, you know what, I'm passionate for days. She was a lot, love her. Just kind of the fighter, the passionate, just the ED, ready to do all of the things, justice, social justice organization. And she felt like no one ever understood her because she's a lot. And so she's like, I had to have a logic model. So my staff was like, oh, that's what you're trying to say. Okay. Like now we got you. I love her fire, love all of that, but they just didn't understand, well, what are we doing? Because you have a lot of energy, but we don't know what to do. So she was really excited to put stuff to paper so that people who don't necessarily think like her could look at it and say, oh, okay, I see you. You want me to do this thing. I got you. So just, think about that. There's clarity, it builds staff energy, and it can be used for fundraising, program planning, design, improvement, and evaluation. And I did, again, I had another leader who said, a funder just said, hey, can I see your logic model? Like, I don't need a whole proposal because I pretty much see what I want to see in this logic model if you've gone through that exercise. And they were funded. So she was really excited that it did that. Really excited. So what we want you to do is shift your perspective. And instead of talking about your activities, talk about the results of those activities. So instead of the service you provide, talk about the change that service creates in the world. Even when you do a little pitch, because we've done pitch sessions and things where you have I don't know, that 60 seconds or those 2 minutes to say what your organization does. And what we said is start talking about the results or the impact rather than what you do. So rather than saying, oh, we help kids, da 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 da, you can say, this many people have graduated since my program started. So you talk about more of what you've accomplished than what you do, because a lot of people do things, but we want to know what the results have been. And from a funding perspective, keep in mind that a funder is not a donor, they're an investor. So they're a partner. They want to make sure that they're not just donating so that their money goes away. They want to see what their ROI is, right? Their return on investment. They want to actually see the level of change that you've created. So if you learn how to speak in that way, because you have accomplished things, you just need to talk about that up front rather than kind of what you do. So for instance, I'll make this a little bigger for myself. 150 participants attended our program. So you feel good, 150 people came, that was great. But what's the actual impact? 85 graduated, 100 got employed within the first month of the program. That's what you really want to talk about, right? Because that's why you created this program. You didn't create a program so 150 people would attend. You actually created it so that people could graduate and get jobs. So that's how you have to think about this. In a second example, we distributed 5,000 cans of food. Again, that's nice, that's a lot of food, but what did you really want from that? You wanted 150 hungry people consume nutritional food 3 times per week for 3 months. So what did we actually accomplish? What changed? What happened as a result of us having those folks come? So how do you begin? How do you get started to start talking about using this kind of language and making sure people know what you accomplished? Outcomes are results. They're like the final chapter in a book, and you can't fully understand the ending without going through the rest of the story first. So we'll begin at the beginning, right? The logical progression of outcome measurement from beginning to end starts with the need. So the first thing is your need statement. Why did you exist in the first place? So why did you create this organization? Again, it wasn't to have 150 people go to the walk. It wasn't to, make sure that 30 people come to the session every afternoon. It's because you wanted to address a need in the community. You felt like if we don't exist, if we don't create this, then blank is going to continue to go on. So what was the issue your program was trying to address? And why is it important to address it? That's what you're looking for. And you want to know, is the issue compelling? So would someone say, yeah, you know what, I can see why you decided to make this program. What's the hole you were trying to fill in the marketplace? Because the other thing is, what this problem that's happening, why is your program the one that's going to address it? Why are you good at this? And what's the thing that you're doing that's going to make it go away or better? So what is the scale of the program? Who is affected and how? So if you understand your need, then that's the beginning. We exist because all of these, answer all of these questions kind of on your screen. So we know what the problem is. We know what, when you wrote your mission or your vision statement, you kind of know what you're talking about. So now that you've expressed the problem at hand, it's time to describe exactly how you plan to address the issue you raised in the needs section with measurable outcomes. Right. So this is where you outline a statement of project goals and objectives. So people and even funders use the term differently, but for our purposes today, we'll say that goals are broad, general statements of what you plan to accomplish. The objectives flow from the goals, and they are specific and measurable within a realistic time frame. So you may know that SMART goals. Some people use the SMART acronym. So what are you trying to achieve? And your tip is your objectives must be measurable. So we want them to be SMART, as we said. The difference between goals, objectives, and outcomes. It's pretty common for people to get confused about the difference between goals, objectives, outcomes, especially as the terms are sometimes kind of thrown around interchangeably. But let's get clear on the differences before we go on. So here are the definitions. Goals and objectives both refer to what you plan to achieve, but have not necessarily achieved yet. And between these two, goals are broad and general, while objectives are specific and measurable. So remember, the objectives have to be SMART, right? Outcomes, meanwhile, are a lot like your objectives, except that they are the future results of those objectives. They're, in fact, the extent to which you have achieved your objectives. And this will make a little more sense later when you see it kind of through Lori. So this is what we're saying. Goals, broad general description. Objectives, these are the SMART ones that you can measure. Outcomes, that's the extent to which you've accomplished your objectives. And again, like I said, you'll see it a little bit better. So here's an example: goal versus objective versus outcome. We need that. So goals, remember, these are the broad statements of what you'll do, right? So the Cancer Wellness Foundation will assist individuals in receiving prescribed medical treatment for their cancer diagnosis that otherwise lack access to care, right? The objective: this year, 300 cancer patients that cannot afford round-trip transportation to prescribed chemotherapy and radiation appointments will be issued gasoline vouchers, right? So that's what you're kind of doing. And then the outcome. So this is the extent to which we got it done. 95% of cancer patients participating in transportation program will report receiving all chemotherapy and radiation treatments as prescribed by their medical doctor. So this is what you want to accomplish. And you're thinking, if it's successful, then 95% of cancer patients, et cetera. So you're kind of setting that up for yourself. Like that outcome would be, that would work for us, or it happened. Sometimes it's happened already. And just, just to note, you might say, why wouldn't I want 100%? And yes, we all want 100%, but it's more realistic, again, to have 95%. And we know life and different things happen. So that's a good, I think 95% is pretty good. And depending on what you're doing, 50% might be good. So just keep that in mind. So in identifying objectives, you always want to ensure that they're SMART. SMART criteria for outcomes means that, again, specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. This sets you up for success because you can measure what you say your project will accomplish beyond broader, overarching goals. You never want to hear, like, we're going to eradicate hunger. Like, okay, we really need to know how, kind of daily and through what we're trying to do, first of all, we're going to feed this many people, and then actually start measuring it. So you don't want to make things so broad. So specific provides clear direction on what actions must be taken and easy to understand. Measurable, so this is quantifiable and verifiable through measurement. Attainable, realistic given your organization's capabilities. Results oriented, so focused on an outcome, so the change in behavior or condition, not method by which you get there. So a lot of times we talk about what we're doing and we're not talking about what's going to happen as a result of what we've done. And then time bound, make sure you set a time frame that is reasonable. So by the end of the school year or by the middle of the fall, or that kind of stuff. So illustrating results through a logic model. I think I might be ready to actually pass this over, right?
We do have a few questions. How does a young organization show impact without extensive data? Is it best to rely on statistics that demonstrate the benefit of similar type of services?
Absolutely right. So what you do is, we haven't done this yet. We created this based upon, when you're talking about your need, you're usually looking up statistics and trying to make sure I have a program because this exists. So those kinds of statistics that show what the problem is and then that show the benefit of having your kind of program are perfect for that. And then again, as you become older and you start getting that kind of information, make sure you're keeping it because you now understand that you're going to have to, quantify and qualify.
Okay. All right, I think I've got my video showing now. Ebony, any other questions on this part before we jump into the logic model?
No, you can keep going. Thanks.
Okay. All right, so a lot of you have already brought up logic models, so we're going to jump into understanding that and some of the terms we use. First of all, let me back up here. What is a logic model? And it's a framework for understanding how you will address the need that you're working on and how you will solve the issue. We talk about the logic model a lot in relation to grant proposals, and I'll talk in a little bit about how you use that with a grant proposal, but it's good for every organization, whether you're going for a grant or not. And I loved Yvonne's example about, someone just trying to get everybody on the same page. I also like to think of the logic model as sort of a roadmap, because, if you don't know where you're going, how do you know if you've got there yet? Okay, so logic model kind of lays out, what the trip is going to look like and what it will look like when you arrive or when you get there, whether you get there or not. But at least it gives you a direction to head in. Okay, so these are some of the terms that we use, and we're going to spend some time going over these. First of all, inputs. These are the resources you need to provide the services or the activities that you're doing. Another way I like to think about this in relation to the grant proposal is inputs are the kinds of things you need the money for, right? You need for staff or for supplies or for rent, things like that. These inputs that let you do your activities. Otherwise, you can't do what you do. So that's one way to think about inputs is that, what are the things that you need to spend that money on? Activities, pretty self-explanatory. As we mentioned in the beginning, we talk about activities all the time and not so much about other things, but activities are important too. These are the things that you do, the things you do every day to make your organization work, whatever actions, interventions, and you do these things because you have those inputs. So that's activities. As I said, that's probably the easiest one to explain. Outputs are the direct result of those programs' activities. So let's say, we'll give an example here just of a food bank. Okay, you have your inputs, you have the food wherever you get it from, whether it's donated or whatever, you have, volunteers to put it together. These are inputs. The activities are that, you were putting together this food, whether it's in, packages or whether people are coming in to eat the food. And then the direct product of those activities is that X number of people are being fed, whether it's in your place or somewhere else. And these outputs often are described in terms of size and scope. So let's say in the food bank, outputs are that 100 people per day receive meals as the result of our program. And then outcomes, as we've been talking about, they're sort of that more big picture goals and objectives. These are the specific changes that you expect to achieve. In other words, you're not just feeding people necessarily for a day, but you're trying to provide sustenance for people who otherwise would not have it. You want to provide that sustenance so that they can continue living, maybe so that they can continue doing better in their life. So that this is one basic need that has to be met before they can do anything else. So these are some of the outcomes like that. So inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes are what make up the logic model. So, and it's called a logic model because it's linear. You think of it as a logical progression of steps. So if you go from your inputs to your activities, to your outputs and your outcomes. And as I mentioned, when you put this into the scope of a grant proposal, someone had said in the chat that, you could really just submit. It'd be nice if they would just let you submit your logic model for the proposal. But you do in a way, but you sort of reconfigure it. And this is how you would do it. The need, then the objectives, the program project description, and then again, the outcomes. It's called the same thing, but the need are, what your inputs and things are. Then your objectives are what you're going to be doing with those, or your activities. The overall project description is, sort of comparative to the outputs, and then the outcomes. So this is just how it would fit into, let's say, a grant proposal. But as I mentioned, there's a lot more reasons to do a logic model than just a grant proposal. The other thing we like to do is think about the logic model as a recipe. This is an easy way to explain it. So the inputs are your ingredients. This is what you need to bake a cake, eggs, butter, not just, those ingredients, but you need mixing bowl or a hand mixer or something. These are all the things that you're going to need to put this together. The activities are, whipping the eggs, stirring everything together, putting it in the oven, or whatever you need to do. Outputs would be actually the cake itself. And then outcomes would be that, you have something for your party or your guests to consume, something pleasurable to consume. That's the outcome. So that's a very, sort of, neat way of looking at the different examples that compose the logic model. But we're going to spend a little more time on that just so that you have a clear idea. Like I said, inputs and activities are usually easiest. Outputs and outcomes gets a little more difficult. So this is sort of the graph that you would use to put together. And I believe we have this in one of our handouts. There'll be an empty one, but this is how you would put the logic model together. So your inputs, these are the things that you need in order to function, in order to do the programs or whatever that you have set out to do. Inputs, those are the things you need. Activities is actually what you do with those inputs. And then the outputs are what you produce. Like I said, those can be a little tricky. A lot of times they're going to be sort of in, a numerical thing. In other words, we're doing this activity, we're providing food. Well, how many meals to how many people, how many times a week? So outputs are usually going to be framed in the sense of a number. Now here in most logic models, we grouped outcomes together, but there's really, they can be short-term outcomes, mid-term outcomes, or long-term outcomes. Now, short-term outcomes are how people will be affected immediately. In the case of our food bank, say, immediately people will eat. That's a short-term outcome. Let's say you had a tutoring program for after school. The short-term outcome is that, kids will learn to read better or do math better or something. That's the short-term outcome. The midterm outcome is what change in attitudes, behavior, skill, or status will happen over a longer period, say maybe 1 to 3 years. And that's the thing about outcomes too. Change is very important. How are they affected, but also how is this changing the people that you're working with? So any change in attitudes, behavior, and skills, say over, roughly 1 to 3 years. And this is a very approximate thing. But again, our example of a tutoring program. So let's say immediately the students will learn to read or improve. Midterm outcome might be in 1 to 3 years, you actually see their grades go up or their attitude towards school improves. That's more of a midterm outcome. You don't see that every day when they walk away from the tutoring session, but over time, this is the outcome you might see. And then the long-term outcome, again, this is a change that happens maybe even longer, over 4 to 7 years. Say as a result of being in this program and, improving their learning skill, they have a better attitude and they graduate from high school. They go to college or they get a good job. That's a long-term outcome. And that's the long-term impact that you want for your program. So those are, like I said, we can break outcomes into 3 different levels of outcome. But again, they're all about what happens after you do what you do. Okay, another quick example, and then we'll move on from this and get into a few other things. But we mentioned before about the food bank. Okay, and this is something that they did. They're distributing food to hungry people. Okay, this is an example of a rough outline of a logic model for that. Okay, so your inputs are your staff and volunteers. They're the food that you need to purchase or have donated, and maybe the space to gather in. Okay, the activity is that you distribute the cans of food. That's what you do every day. The output is the number of people reached and the number of cans distributed. And then the outcome, the output, is the 5,000 cans distributed and the number of people. The outcome is that hungry people consume nutritional food 3 times a week for 3 months. Okay, one more. 150, this was the program, the Menti program. No, this was a tutoring program. Okay, again, staff and volunteers, space, printed materials, those are typical. The activity is that you put this program on. The output is how many people reached, and then the outcome is how many were graduated and employed within the first month of the program. So, and you will get a copy of these slides to sort of compare this. All right. Now I want to say just a word about monitoring and evaluation because it's related to the logic model. Monitoring and evaluation of your program. It's the strategy to determine how you measure your effectiveness. Remember, we talked about outcomes and goals being measurable. So monitoring and evaluation is an important part of that. Monitoring is the ongoing oversight of your program. In other words, to determine, are we meeting our goals? Just like with a roadmap, if you're going on a long trip, you don't, wait until the end. You want to, see where you want to look at where you're going all the way along. How far have we gotten so far? Are we going in the right direction? That's even more important if you're planning a trip. And monitoring helps you establish that. This is the extent to which all things are proceeding according to plan. And then evaluation is the process that seeks to determine how the outcome, how it's being achieved and the impact. Another way to think of evaluation, we all, are probably knee deep in success metrics. And that's the purpose of those. In other words, how, as we're going along, how do we evaluate that this program is working? How do we evaluate that these children who are in this program are benefiting from it, if it's changing their outlook? How do you do that? So there are a few types of evaluation. One is just process evaluation. In other words, are you just doing what you said you were going to do? If your program is to match these mentors and mentees, how is that going? Maybe after 3 months, you only have, you wanted 100 mentees. Maybe you only have been able to attract 25 or 30. Okay, so you have to evaluate that and see, okay, were we too optimistic, or are we not doing something effectively to recruit those mentors and mentees? This is kind of one of those ongoing things that you need to do. And this is, we talk about this in relation to grant proposals. Yeah, sometimes funders are going to want to check in with you in 3 to 6 months and say, how is it going when you're doing what you're doing with the money? Maybe you'll find out halfway through you didn't have enough input. You didn't have enough money to actually do the things you said you were going to do. So this is when you want to course correct and modify. Satisfaction evaluation is different, just what it says. It's more about, finding out if the people who are participating in your program or the beneficiaries of your program are satisfied. Did they like it or not like it? Are they feeling it's worthwhile? Are they being changed? That's the satisfaction evaluation. And then the final outcome evaluation. This is where you compare what's happening to your stated, short, mid, and long-term objectives. So now we're coming up on the hour, so I'm going to kind of speed this up a little bit so we can get to more of your questions. And let me pause here. Ebony, was there something else that came in specific to the logic model?
Yes. Nicholas asked, could you tell them more about assumptions and evaluation questions?
That's a whole nother class. I can tell you some about that, but yes, program evaluation is a whole kind of art in itself, in terms of what you would ask. And it really is dependent on what your organization is. That's really the main reason we can't evaluate it in the course of this. But it's just like with every organization is going to have different outcomes. The outcomes of an art organization versus a food bank versus something related to education, you're going to have different ones, and you have to think about specifically how you measure that. So that's really specific to your particular organization, to your field. There are some commonalities if you're in a particular issue area, but yeah, that's a lot more specific.
All right.
Anything else?
Is measuring for fidelity considered a process evaluation?
I'm sorry, measuring for what?
Fidelity.
Fidelity. Oh, you mean that how committed they are to the program? I'm assuming that's what you mean. That can be a metric of success, to use that sometimes. In other words, for example, in the case of the mentees, or tutoring program, do people drop out? Are kids dropping out after a few times, or are they committed to being the program? That could be a success metric. Again, it depends on your specific organization or your issue area. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention, your Candid Profile is included in what we call our GuideStar database. And what that is that, number one, if you have a 501c3, if you've ever filed a tax return, then you are already in GuideStar. It's a directory of all nonprofit organizations, both service-directed and also foundations. And what we do is that we give people a chance to claim their profile and add information to it. If you don't claim your profile, then all we have is the information we got from the IRS, which is your name and address of your organization, maybe your CEO's name, and then in a general, what area they operate in. But if we give everyone a chance to claim their profile, for example, in this example, the YMCA of Silicon Valley, and then you can add information that talks about your mission and who you are, exactly what programs you are. And a lot of organizations, a lot of big organizations use GuideStar to do their due diligence on nonprofits that they're interested in donating to. Okay, so this is where you get the chance to do that. Platforms like Facebook, a lot of donor advised funds, when they're looking for organizations to contribute to or to recommend to the people who hold these funds, a lot of them are doing their research on GuideStar. So it's free for you to claim your profile, and you earn what we call seals of transparency. So we do actually have webinars coming up on GuideStar. I'm not going to spend an enormous amount of time today talking about the different levels, but it depends on how much how much information you provide. But the platinum level is where you really get to highlight your impact. And this is where you share things like your outcomes and your success metrics, to show people exactly, you know, why you're doing what you're doing and what type of effect you're having to donors. So this is where you would put them in to earn your platinum seal on GuideStar. And then you can share these metrics. When you claim your profile, we even help you determine what metrics you should be using to do that. So, and you can pick the ones that best highlight your effect. In other words, whether it's the numbers of people coming to your program or exactly what's happening to them, you can just choose which ones, you know, look the best, or which ones you're making the most progress in. So you can include those metrics. You provide context, and then a target population to connect to each of those. So we have what we call our common results catalog that tells you what some common metrics are. And also, as I said, this is specific to your issue area. So if you're an environmental group, there are particular metrics that you would use to measure those results versus an arts organization or a social justice organization. Those metrics are all going to be different. So our common results catalog, and we'll send you that link in the follow-up as well. That will help you determine when you're looking at evaluating your program. And again, you enter those metrics into the platinum section to earn your platinum seal after you work through the other ones. And then you basically have almost a complete grant proposal at that point. You have your impact, you have an outline of your programs, an outline of the people who work for your organization. A lot of people tell us this kind of information gives them a leg up in applying for grants, because they will refer potential donors to their GuideStar profile to get a lot of information already without them having to submit it again and again. So that's the benefit of having thought through your outcomes and things and then putting them in your profile. So we are going to stop here. I'm going to stop here, and we're going to take more of your questions. If also, and you'll see this in our slides, we have some possible ebooks that you can borrow that tells you more about coming up with outcomes, and also program evaluation metrics and measurements. There are some books. We have a free collection of ebooks that you can log on to Candid Learning, learning.candid.org, and you can find ebooks to borrow that talk about some of those. And we'll put some other of those links in the follow-up that we'll send. But I just want to, I want to stop here and see if we can take some more questions. Yvonne and I will be on for a little bit longer. Okay.
Yeah, we have a quick question. Are outcomes expected on the Candid profile rather than outputs?
You would be putting outcomes into, well, the short answer is both, actually. You earn levels of seals that progress among each other. Probably you would be talking about outputs when you get to the silver level, when you talk about your programs and what you're doing. Some of your outputs may go there, but a lot of them would go in the section for your platinum seal. But yes, it would be output, both outputs and outcomes would be needed. Any other questions?
I'm over here trying to answer them. Okay, let me just ask this one out loud. Can you give an example of a startup with no history or accomplishments? What language do we use?
That is difficult, right? You don't have a track record for doing that. Your best bet, and someone mentioned this earlier, is to say, okay, look for results from whatever method or program, similar ones, and what they've achieved. So say, for example, there's studies that show this particular intervention works well with people dealing with addiction, and you plan to apply that intervention in this new startup. Okay, so then you can show we're using this best practice. This is what has been done before. It has been proven effective. That's one way to kind of say, yeah, we are probably, to kind of indicate, yeah, we will probably be a success because we are doing something that, has already been done before, and we can do that. So
Yeah,
that's
and I
one
would
way
say,
to do it. Anything else, Yvonne, you can
yeah,
think of? Yeah.
if you're new, so you're doing that thing that people have done before, but you have a twist and you're doing it differently, or you're doing with a different population or in a different space, those are the things you also want to highlight. Our plan is to do this because we've also learned that, whatever it is. So just
Right.
make sure you have to start somewhere. So also our sample docs, on our learning.candid.org, we have a couple of sample documents that are for newer organizations. And we have particularly letters of inquiry that show what they intend to do. So you may want to look at that language.
Okay. Any other questions coming in?
There's another one here. I haven't read the whole thing, but let's see what it says. I am not aware or familiar with Candid. Someone told me about Candid. I requested to connect with someone from our nearest office, but haven't received a connection. Is it possible to visit one of your locations to help us get started? We are a classical Christian K-12 school. We're working on a capital campaign and launching our first ever annual fund. This is such a good question, Lori.
Yes, it's a big question. Yes, we can tell you more about Candid. Probably the best thing to do is to kind of get an overview, and then you can connect with people. If you go to learning.candid.org, and Ebony will drop that in, we actually have both a live chat and also an ask us by email feature. So if you have, it's number one, learning.candid will give you a big example of what we do in terms of trainings and resources that we offer. But to actually talk to someone, if you have a specific question about something, we do have chat available during working hours, but also there's an ask us form that you can also use.
Someone said many nonprofits deal with social needs, frankly, sad ones. What about an organization that deals with beauty and enjoyment, like a music group?
Yes, a lot of nonprofits do that. I think arts organizations is a good example, and there are many resources, and I think we put that in the follow-up too, that talk about what art does, why it's such a benefit for children, for adults, how its impact on mental health, on performance, things like that. These are softer issues than, say, someone who's providing meals or healthcare or something like that. But there are a lot of things that indicate that the outcomes for people interacting with the arts are very positive. And that's the thing. Americans for the Arts, I believe, is one of the organizations that collects data on that. So in addition to your own data, say your, reviews or surveys of your participants and how they feel about participating. So yeah, that is an important thing as well.
Let's see what else. I know I looked really quickly and then I went somewhere else, but theory of change versus logic model. What is the difference there?
Oh, Yvonne, I'm gonna let.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know.
I'm gonna let you do
no,
that.
That's totally fine. I know the main difference is that the logic model is doing kind of this step-by-step logic, the way Lori showed, like put this in and then you do this and then this happens and then we get here. While theory of change is a little bit more, it talks about kind of the mechanisms, and it shows the why for each intervention that you're doing. So it include a why, and it might be a little more narrative than what we're showing. This is literally a table, and you can literally hand in a logic model in that way, where it's in a table and it shows you the logical progression, while a theory of change is talking about how you're going to change things and the why behind it.
Very good. I knew you'd have a better answer.
Okay, let's see what else we have. This is long. What if your program may have additional outcomes that your nonprofit might not have considered tracking indicators towards since it was founded 20 years ago? For example, a hip hop arts education program that teaches music and arts to students, there might be some outcomes regarding reducing youth incarceration, graduation rates, learning skills. How can you encourage senior leadership to begin tracking data to get a better idea of the results of your programs? The mission of the org is to transform the individual lives and communities through hip hop culture. I love that. We need to know what org that is, by the way. So yes, sorry.
Well, there's two questions. The big question is, how do you get senior leadership to pay attention? And I'm not sure I have an answer for that. But yes, that's trying to get everyone on the same page is one of the benefits of having a logic model or a theory of change, because maybe if they're not thinking in that direction, they should be, because as we know, like I said, the arts, everything, social nonprofits deal with a lot of different issues. Some are immediate and pressing, and like you said, tragic. But there's also an obligation to uplift, or organizations dedicated to that. And it's very important to get senior leadership on board. If you don't, you're going to have a hard time moving it forward. And I don't know, maybe someone else has some suggestions for that they can put in chat. What happens when, you can't get everybody on the same page? That's a tough question, though.
Yeah, it's definitely something. It's a positive thing to have better or more varied outcomes than you thought you were going to have. And it makes sense after all of that time. So it's a good kind of refresher to say, you know what, we do this too. It turns out we've been here long enough to know that we're making even more impact, and there can't be any reason a board or leadership wouldn't want you to have more positive impact. So it's a good kind of refresher. Our organization has realized this and that. I mean, that's all positive. That's a great thing. So you should definitely bring it up and talk about websites, annual reports, candid profiles. We need to brag about this.
Yes. And you also might tell them that opens you up to more funding too. If you're not just doing music education, but you're maybe helping prepare people for the workforce or helping them do something else, then you can look at a broader range of funders. So that might get
we're all
their
trying
attention.
to figure out the org's name right now. So please put it in chat.
Yes. Anything else?
It says, Priscilla says, what if your organization is helping homeless and migrant populations? It's very difficult to track even a month or a year or 4 years later, how to evaluate outcomes other than immediate.
That is a hard one. Yeah. And I'm not sure I have an answer for it other than, again, to look for more longitudinal studies, case studies in your field. Remember, you don't have to necessarily do the measuring if someone else has. If there's some other larger government study or something that does track people and indicate where they're going, that might be helpful.
And in that case, some of what you're doing immediately, we know that's important. So, feeding people, housing people, doing those things before they have to move on, those are important things. People are going to fund you to do those things. So and you can even state that it's harder to measure this, but this is what we do know, and let them know.
Yeah, I remember someone asked me once about an organization that was working with people struggling with addiction and stuff. It's so hard to show that linear progress, or to say, yes, we're curing addiction, but there's still something to be said for the immediate results. Someone else mentioned just adherence to the program. Are you finding more people are coming to your services because the other people referred them to you? That could be a measure of that you're making a difference and you're making progress. Do you find more immigrants are referring other people to come to you?